So as mentioned in the previous video, I am now going to do some examples just to cover completing the square. Before you watch this, if you're unsure about completing the square, just have a quick look at the previous video. It's very short and it quickly goes over completing the square. So I've picked a few questions, some simple ones, but usually the completing the square comes up a lot in things like circles and also when you're finding maximum and minimum values when it comes to some of the differentiation questions. And sometimes they just ask to complete a square, which is relatively the lower mark questions, but still it's best to know how to do it. It's a skill that we need for lots of longer questions that you'll see come up later. Anyway, this question is from 2017. It's from paper 1, again, the Cambridge board, and it's asking you to complete the square on minus x squared plus 6x minus 5. So let's start. That's minus x squared plus 6x minus 5. Now, previously I said that if there's anything next to the x that you don't like, you can take it out. You can kind of take it out as a common factor. So at the moment, I am unhappy with this minus here. So my plan is that I'm going to take the minus out of these two terms. Okay, so the first two terms, that means I'm going to just multiply everything through by a minus. So here's my plan. I'm going to take the minus out, leaving me with x squared. And in order to get that plus, it needs to be a minus and a minus. So I've got x squared minus 6x, and then I have the minus 5 on the outside. Now, if you wanted to, you could take the minus out of the entire equation. You know, that's up to you. But just to stay consistent with the fact that in the previous video, I said that you take the number out of the first two terms, I'm just going to take the minus, or imagine it's a minus 1. Okay, all these bits you can just ignore, just not let them bother you. We are going to complete the square on x squared minus 6x. That doesn't mean that this minus has gone away or the minus 5 has gone away. It's still there, but we're just going to create some space for ourselves and complete the square. So I've got here x squared minus 6 completing the square. Remember, the x squared just becomes an x. Always assign half of this value squared, then always take away that value squared, and then with the minus 5 on the outside. Let's tidy it up a little bit. I've got x minus 3 squared minus 9 minus 5 on the outside. Now you can bring the negative in. So I'm going to multiply the minus on the outside of here and with this number. So I'll get minus x minus 3 squared, and then I've got plus 9 minus 5. Finally, we just have to write the last number together. So I've got plus 9 minus 5 to give me plus 4, and I have completed the square for 3 marks. Now, also remember things like the vertex from here. So if they asked for the vertex, that would just be these two values, but always remember to change the sign of the x value. So the minus 3 will become plus 3, and the 4 will just stay as it is. So the vertex of this graph is 3, 4. Another thing, just interestingly about this graph, remember that I told you a little bit about x squared curves and minus x squared curves. So depending on the kind of shape, you determine whether it's a minimum or a maximum. So because this is a negative x squared, it's going to look like that. So this vertex at 0.34 is in fact a maximum value. So if it's like a sad face, it will give you a maximum value. And if it's a happy face, it will give you a minimum value there. But anyway, they didn't ask for that in the question. The question just asked you to complete the square, and that's done. Right, the next question is from a slightly different board. It's a WJC question. It's a fun question because it's a bit more complicated. It's a 6-mark question where it asks you to complete the square, and then in part B, it's asking you to solve the equation. So it covers a bit more. And the reason to why we complete the square. So let's have a look at part A. It's asking you to express 4x squared plus 40x minus 69 in the form of a completed the square equation, so ax plus b squared plus c. Now remember here a, b, and c are just constants. You just have to keep an eye out for something that has a squared and a number, just to identify what kind of question it is. So this is obviously a completing the square question because they're telling you how to express it. And again, a, b, and c are just numbers. Don't worry about them. We'll find them out as we work through it. Okay, looking at this equation once again, 4 I do not like. I don't want it there, so I'm going to try and take it out, but I'm going to take it out of these two terms. So starting off, I'm going to take 4 out. I've got x squared, take divide 40 by 4 to give you 10x. So when you multiply the 4 by the 10, you'll get back to this term here, to the 40x. Remember, I haven't completed the square here. A lot of my students start making the mistake here where they start putting squares and stuff. Remember, I'm just taking a 4 out, one step at a time. I'm not completing the square yet. Now I start to complete the square, so ignore the 4, create some space for yourself. I'm going to complete the square here, and then I've got the minus 69 on the outside. So to complete the square, this x comes down. This is always the same sign, half of this value. Always take away whatever value you added on the inside squared. Right, let's tidy the inside out. I've got x plus 5 squared minus 25. Close brackets, minus 69. Now bring the 4. You can bring the 4 here and you can bring the 4 here. So you're timesing the 4 through with the two terms. You don't have to expand the bracket. So I've got 4x plus 5 squared. And then 4 times minus 25 gives you minus 100 minus 69. So completed the square form is 4x squared plus, oh, no x squared. That's an error. You want 4x plus 5 all squared minus 169. And we've completed the square. Now, remember, sometimes I find that people start moving backwards, they multiply it through. Once you start doing that, you'll come back to the original equation. And although there's nothing wrong with that because it's the same equation, it's not what the question is asking you to do. It's asking you to write it in completed the square form. So this is the completed the square form. This is what the form that you want to be in. Okay. That's 3 marks. Part B says, using your answer to part A, solve the equation. So this time they're asking us to solve. So if we do part B here, they're asking us to solve 4x squared plus 40x minus 69 equals to 0. Now, when they say solve, it means find x. Okay. Now, there's lots of ways of solving a quadratic equation. You could factorize it. If you can't factorize it, you can use the formula or a calculator if you can, and also complete the square. But they want us to complete the square because they're telling us to use the answer. So I'm going to use my completed the square form. We've rewritten this equation in this form for x plus 5 all squared minus 169 equals to 0. Let's start to solve this. So firstly, I've got this, when I say solve, you're looking for the x, so leave that here. I'm going to take that 169 over to the other side. So I've got 4x plus 5 all squared equals to 169. I've got the 4 multiplying here, divide it on the other side. X plus 5 squared equals to 169 over 4. You can put in your calculator, but don't bother for now because I can see that I'm going to square root it now. So I've got x plus 5 square root of 169 over 4. Oops, equals. So to get rid of the squared on one side, you square root the other side. So you can rewrite this like this. X plus 5 equals to root 169 and root 4. This is going to give you x plus 5 equals to root of 69 will give you plus minus 13, and root of 4 will give you plus minus 2. So the whole factor is going to be x plus 5 plus 13 over 2 or minus 13 over 2. Therefore, your final two answers will be x equals to positive 13 over 2 minus 5, or x is going to be negative 13 over 2 plus 5. And this you can just leave as a fraction, or you can put it in your calculator. So if I just take a common factor of 2, I've got 13 minus 10, and then here I've got x equals to minus 2 as my common factor, 13 plus 10. Your two answers are going to be x equals to 3 over 2, or x equals to minus 3 over 2. And by completing the square, you found the two solutions of this equation. So two solutions of the quadratic equation. On the graph, they're telling you exactly the same thing. So if you're kind of sketching a quadratic graph and you've got two solutions, it's just telling you its points of intersection. So in this case, we've got 3 over 2 and minus 3 over 2. And that is the answer to that question. Those are the 6 marks. Any other questions, please feel free to ask. And I'd be happy to answer.